Sean, always a pleasure, man. How you doing? And dude, talk about a wicked podcast location that you're recording from. Give us the rundown. Where you at, man?
Yeah, the Great Smoky Mountains. We were in Gatlinburg. Now we're in Pigeon Forge. They have like a Dollywood out here and all kinds.
Okay.
I've never seen anything like it. It's like a giant carnival for miles. I don't know if you've ever been out here. It's ridiculous. There's too many things. You'd have to be out here for a month and a half to do everything.
And that's Dollywood. It's like a redneck
Dollywood
Disneyland. What is this?
It's kind of like Disneyland, but Dollywood's just out here. There's literally like, I think I've seen like 20 go-kart tracks. There's probably like 40 mini golf places. It's ridiculous. There's these giant mountain coaster things that I don't know. It's hard to explain without being here. It's pretty unreal, but the kids
I take it you guys are just out on holiday, just enjoying.
Kids are in their fall break. One thing about Tennessee compared to California, they don't like the school are longer days and less breaks during their days at school, but then they get more week-long plus breaks. So we're in one of those. So we just decided we'll probably take like 5 or 6 big vacations. Like I think our next one's going to be Costa Rica. We're just going to start taking big trips all the time because we have these big chunks to go do it.
Yeah. That's great, man. Well, let's get into it. So for you guys listening, maybe for the first time, this is our Ask Me Anything episode. It comes out every Wednesday on the Order of Man podcast. And this is where we field questions from a number of sources. Typically, today, we're going to field questions from the Iron Council. To learn more about that exclusive brotherhood, you can go to orderofman.com/Iron Council. And when you go there, you're just going to find out information, and then you're going to have to wait because we actually don't open membership all the time. We open up at segments. We have cohorts, onboard them, and we usually do that on a quarterly basis. So if that's something that you're interested in, stay connected to us. Join the Facebook group at facebook.com/group/Order of Man, or follow Mr. Mickler at Ryan Mickler on Twitter and or Instagram, or go to the website, sign up during the newsletter, and then you'll be notified when we open up membership later this year in preparation for Q1 of 2023. So, and like, it's the old guy thing to say, like, holy crap, 2023, isn't that crazy? So anyhow, we're fielding questions. I'll go ahead and dive into these, man. So Ben Lewis, what advice do you have for people writing their first vision statement / battle planner? How do we tap into that inner version of ourselves to find out what our true motivators are? There's a lot to that question that we could kind of latch onto, but yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
There is. I'm just thinking back to the first one I did. I was 22, and I just remember trying to think of who I wanted to be, what I wanted my life to look like. I was a young single guy, just like all 22-year-old single guys, doing really stupid things, partying all the time, and thought, okay, what would I want my ideal life to look like? Which I wanted to be married and have children and kind of this ideal. And then I just started personally writing down a top 10 of things I wanted to do or have. And that started it. And then through that, it evolved and everything. But it's funny looking back on that top 10, the most important quote unquote things to me. I still have that first one I wrote. And one of the top 10 was painting flames on my El Camino. I used to have a 1979 El Camino, and I wanted to paint flames on it.
Priorities, man. Priorities of a 22-year-old. Yeah,
exactly. But that was part of my quote unquote ideal. It was important to me, and it drove me. It actually pushed me to do more. So even if it seems like maybe ridiculous, if it's important to you, I think starting with that's important. What would you say?
Yeah. Well, and and not to beat you up a little bit, Ben, I guess there are some motivators in there, but I'd go deeper than that, right? Like I would not call them motivators, and I would say impactors. Like, what's in the vision that you've gotten connected to in a powerful way that you understand the impact of it? And that's going to, and this is kind of the measuring stick I've used in the IC. Your vision statement needs to move, touch, and inspire you. And there's a difference between being motivated and being inspired.
A giant difference.
Big difference. And if I'm a person that's inspired, you become the possibility of inspiration for others. That's how powerful inspiration is. Motivation is just kind of, I think it's more fleeting, and Jocko talks about that a little bit, but I would go for move, touch, and inspired, not necessarily motivated. Now, guys, I mean, we talked about this over the Order Man main event this past weekend, and guys had these visions that were like very, almost like goals, right? 5 years out, I want to blah, 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 right? And they go that route. The problem with that is I think it puts the emphasis that happiness or success is in the flames on the El Camino, right? Or in the money in the bank account, or in the house, or whatever. And as I've gotten older, and maybe become more of a philosopher than I have been, in my younger years, I think it's more about who we are being and how we show up in the world. And when I think about that inspires me, not for greatness 10 years from now, but that inspires me for greatness today, right now. And so advice on writing a first mission statement, me personally, mine is about how I'm going to show up today, because that's all I got. I got today. There's no guarantees on tomorrow. There's no guarantees, a week from now or a month. And so my mission and my why should drive me today. And it's all about how I show up in spite of my circumstances, and how I show up as a man, and what I write out is in the spirit of being powerful enough that I'm moved, touched, and inspired to live today to the fullest.
I'm glad this came up, because I want to give a little pushback on that.
Yeah.
That's why I tried to think of my first one, because, and the reason I brought up the flames was exactly what you said, because that at that time wasn't something just motivating to me, because I agree with you. Motivation is temporary. It drove me to the point where I couldn't sleep at night thinking about it. And thinking back on that,
flames on, man. Well, hold on. So
thinking back on that is actually stupid.
What was the byproduct of the flames? Like, what were they?
I literally thought, now this is it was deeper than just a flame, but I literally thought there used to be this club in Hollywood that we used to go to called the Key Club. And they used to park like this. One of the owners of the place had this like Cadillac that he had that was all decked out and whatever, that would be parked in front. And when the guy would pull up, you'd have all these girls like, oh, who's that? And I literally thought, like, if I painted the flames on my Elko, I would drive up and I'd be that guy that the girls were like, oh, wow, check this guy out.
Look at those flames. Yeah.
That I attached that feeling to the flame. So it wasn't just the flames, it was a whole feeling. It was something that was going to bring.
It's what that represented. So you got inspiration from what that would mean about you as a man, or how you would show up, was that the flames was an outward expression of what you really wanted.
Yeah. And that for me was as far, but the reason that's important, and the reason I'm saying not pushback like we're going to argue about it, but pushback like,
no, we can argue.
Like right now, that seems stupid to me. Thinking back on it, like that was really dumb, but simultaneously it's not, because I needed that at that time, because I wasn't mature enough yet. I hadn't grown out of that yet. And the funny thing is out of those top 10 things that I wrote down, I got every single one of those things, except for the flames and 2 others that were on the list, because they just became non-important through the process. And through that process of me becoming inspired and then finding out who I really wanted to be and how I wanted to show up, then it changed and evolved. And then And then that same passion and drive came from other things. And so I just marked one off of the list and replaced it with something else, but it still had to drive me the same. So I think that's the importance. I think the difference, like you said, the important thing is the difference between motivation and it's something that drives and inspires and pushes you, that you can wake up, not even wake up, that, like I said, it's literally hard to sleep at night because you're so excited thinking about it. I think if there's any one thing that you can get to in writing down what you want or who you want to be, that makes you feel even a little bit like that, I think that's the important part.
Totally. Well, and that it's going to evolve and change based upon where you're at. And so then even listening to us, like, don't get so wrapped up in like, well, is it the right vision? Like, does it serve you? Is it pushing you forward? Awesome. And then once you get to that ridge, you don't know what's on the other side of the ridge. You don't know what pivots and adjustments you need to make until you get your ass up on the ridge. So get up on the ridge, pivot, adjust, evolve, and move on from there. One thing I do like about this, that when the vision statement happens to be more about how you show up, I've used this and it just kind of magically works out well, right? Because here's the other thing, right? Guys will write visions whatever approach they take. And then, like, how often do you look at that thing, right? And so historically, it's really nice, right? Because you're like, oh man, I made some progress. But sometimes we need to get connected to it more often, right? Yeah. And so it needs to be an active tool. Maybe, at least for me, having it be an active tool in my day-to-day is highly valuable. Well, it's really hard when my vision that I read today to help me show up today is like elusive future, right? I mean, I don't know. I find it harder to connect to for today. But if it's a little bit more how I show up, then I can look at that and go, okay, now what do I have today? Okay, I got these meetings, I got these things, and this is how I'm going to show up powerfully based upon what I wrote. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And
I'm wondering, go ahead.
The battle planner is so valuable that way. It's in two ways. If you have the physical battle planner or the app on your phone, I think the important thing, and I got this from Think and Grow Rich, was one of the first books I read when I started doing this, that actually I kind of followed the guideline that it had in Think and Grow Rich and how to articulate and write out a plan for your future and what you want. And the important part in writing down that plan was less the exact plan, and it was more about reading it out loud twice a day. So exactly what you just said, having it in front of you daily at when you start your day and when you end your day. And then that at the start of your day, it helps push you, drive you, inspire you to do what you need to do that day. At the end of the day, it kind of helps you do your AAR, your after action review of, okay, how did my day go? Right. What did I do today that got me closer to this goal, but without reading it out loud twice a day. And you have to read it with emotion, like we talked about. Like, that's funny. I can think back to still how I thought those flames were going to make me feel, because I was reading it every day with passion, with feeling, as if I already had those things that I wanted. And it just made me feel different. It changed my state.
Yeah. There's just thousands of guys listening that are just now going to add like flames, like add flames to my Land Rover,
Maybe, what's awesome. Funny too, is maybe you'll get one. I had one of my things was I wanted a Z06. There was when they 50th anniversary Z06 in Electron Blue, my dream car. I wanted this car. I got the car. So I bought it. And then I remember sitting in traffic in LA one day, because it was a 6-speed, right? So I'm sitting there with this stick in traffic, like, this sucks. Like, I'd almost rather be in a Honda Civic, because I'd be more comfortable.
Riding the clutch like crazy. Yeah, riding the clutch like crazy on grid light traffic. Yeah.
But it was like, wow, I wanted this so bad, and now here I am, and now it's just my car. So sometimes that's going to happen too, but that's fine because that drove me so hard for so many years, right? And
did it serve you ultimately?
There's a means to an end.
See, I was just trying to get 50 series tires on my Chevy Love. You know what I mean? Like I just need some nice.
Did you really have a
50
Love?
series? I did have a Chevy Love.
Yes.
Not only did I have a Chevy Love, it had flames on it.
No
it had,
way.
Yeah, it was gray. I had 4-inch lowering blocks. It was gray with pink flames. Don't ask.
Oh,
and not only this thing was such a piece of shit that on the passenger side, it was the driver's side of the floorboard. It had this massive hole that I used plywood to cover. And so like if you drove in the rain, your feet would get all wet, but it was lowered and it was badass. It was so sweet.
It's like the Flintstones.
Oh man. And what was cool about it, I bought that truck, I think when I was 14.
Oh,
and I drove it all the time.
Oh.
And I don't think I drove it actually once I was 16. It was my car before I even had a license. It was,
that's hilarious.
It's a whole different time. I mean, it's small town world, but I love my lowered cars. I was all about hip hop. Right. So anyhow, I thought this might be valuable. Maybe, I don't know, but it's too late now. I'm going to do it anyway. So I have my journal and it's beautiful handwriting.
That is nice.
All right. So I have my journal and my bookmark in my journal is my vision. And so maybe as an example, this is evolution of this thing, right? But and I'm not always on the path here, but when I am journaling on a daily basis and I read this bad boy, or I pull up into the driveway and read this before I go into the house to kind of level set, you can kind of see as I read this, how it kind of sets the tone, right, for what I'm about to do. So there's two things I do. I'd read this and then I visualize, all right, what do I have today? And based upon what I just read, how am I going to show up throughout the day? And I don't mind this. I don't mind sharing. This is not overly, personal or anything, but I'll read it briefly and then we'll move on to the next question because I think it might be beneficial to some of you guys listening. This is what I wrote. This very moment, I choose who I am for today and for the rest of my life. The thoughts and actions I make today mold my future. Today, I choose honor, impact, and righteousness. Today, I choose a life worth living. Today, I decide to live life to the fullest with no regret. Today, not only do I honor those that have passed before me, but I also honor those that will come. Today, I will give my wife and my life a chance to be amazing. And I will do that by letting go of my judgments, stories, and living fully in the present. I do this not to look good or to avoid looking bad, but I do this because this is who I choose to be, because I am choosing to invent myself. I may be tempted to think that this very moment doesn't matter and that I can change later or be caused to action another time, but there is no tomorrow. Do I have a guarantee that tomorrow will even come? What is at stake today? Is tomorrow guaranteed for everyone in my life? Yesterday has already been gone. And do I not already wish that I could have done it better? I will not waste today and I'll not waste a moment. If problems are placed before me today, I will confront them head on. I will not shrink out of hopelessness or fear. I will find the benefit and the value in every struggle. I will go to the Lord in prayer for guidance in all aspects of my life, whether work or personal. Life doesn't care about my self-pity or my story. The only disability in life is a bad attitude. So
that was awesome.
Me, right? And back to what we were saying earlier, I can read this and I'm like, all right, like now I'm ready, right? And that may not do that for you guys that just heard, but the idea is that this really sets the tone for how I show up. And that is how I've approached the whole vision thing.
That was awesome.
Okay.
Well, you could see your state change. I mean, most of the guys are going to be listening to this and not seeing you, but honestly, watching you read it, you could see the emotion change in your face as you were reading it. Yeah. It definitely makes an impact.
And what am I thinking about? My dad's passed away. How do I honor him? Mm-hmm. Right. I think about my kids. How do I honor them? You're like, there's more, right, kind of going on in the brain than obviously what I'm just reading.
Yeah. Powerful.
All right. Kyle Brown, how should you structure the responsibilities between husband and wife? My wife stays home and I provide financially for the household. We don't have children yet. So Hannah's responsibilities are to maintain the home, cooking, learning about motherhood and children, and taking care of me. I want to ensure Hannah does not have to make money so she can focus all her energy on being a mother when that time comes, and homeschooling. Should we maintain a path where we are currently and continue building the structure of a household for when the children come, or should she be generating money until we have children to help us financially ahead? So no kids yet.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This is an easy trap to get into. I actually want to give a word of caution with trying to assign roles as a couple, because my wife and I actually do couples coaching all the time. And one of the reasons we started a business to do this is because this came up so many times for us, because we've worked together in our business since we started dating. And, people ask us all the time, how do you do it? You're together all the time. You're, blah, blah, blah. How do you assign your roles? Who does what? And we never assigned roles. And so what we decided a long time ago is that we both know what we're trying to achieve together as a couple. This is before we had kids, as a team.
Yep.
So where we're headed. So this is a perfect segue from what we were just talking about. Knowing what you want, who you want to be, how you want to show up. And then as a couple, what that was together. So we had our goals together as a couple, as a family, as in our business, in our spiritual lives, in our physical lives, all of those things. And being on the same page together and knowing where we were headed was the most important thing. And then once we had that, then it was easy for us to just head in that direction. And so sometimes, like, everybody goes through seasons. And so what I'll say to that, the reason this is important for you now, because you've got it dialed. You're working, she's taking care of you, she's doing stuff at the home. Once 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids comes into the equation, that's going to get harder for her. So right now it might be pretty dialed, but maybe you'll get home down the road after you have kids, and maybe dinner's not ready. Maybe something, the house isn't clean. Maybe, so instead of you getting home and saying, hey, this wasn't done today. Yeah. Why didn't you do that? Or you see something that needs to be picked up. You need to be prepared to, maybe you clean up the house. Maybe you help get dinner ready. Maybe you just pick up where things aren't done instead of just assigning that role. And where I see so many couples get into arguments, number one, they're not on the same page to begin with. But then when their quote unquote role isn't being completed or isn't being done, or
their expectations aren't met.
Yes. Then that causes argument, strife, whatever you want to call it. And so I think focus less on the definition of who does what and focus more on where you want to be and who you want to be as a couple. And then just pick up for each other as you go. And we talked about the evolution of who does what. That's going to change too throughout your roles. And I'll just give you my example, and then you jump in here. When we started our business, my wife and I, we actually started the same business separately, and then met in our business and started dating, and then got married, and then combined it. So we were already very good at what we do separately and on our own. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is that just because you guys are so damn competitive with each other? So you're just like, hey,
that was a part of it. That was definitely a part of it.
It sounds like something Mike Asia and I would do.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about.
I'll do it better. I'm like, bring it.
So that starting separately and being good at it, we were really good. And then when we combined, it was like, okay, you're a little stronger at this, I'm a little stronger at this, which at the time hers was like setting up appointments, making phone calls, follow up, the back end of our business. Mine was out on appointments, sitting with people, actually doing that stuff. And so I did that. And then I literally, when we started having kids, I was gone all day on appointments. this is obviously pre-Zoom, so I had to do physical appointments. I was driving for hours every day, doing 7, 8, 9, 10 appointments a day in different parts of, to like geographically just driving all over the place. But I was never home. We started having kids, and that was still our first kid, would go to the office with her and I'd go do that stuff. Second kid, that started changing. Third kid, she got sick and she couldn't do a lot of the things she was doing. She couldn't do anything at home anymore. And so I couldn't be gone all day like I was. And it drastically, we had to shift. And then I went from basically being out kind of doing all these appointments and making all this stuff happen to I had to be home and I had to take care of the kids because she literally physically couldn't get up off of the couch a bunch of days. I had to make food. So I was making meals. Food prep for her was 4 or 5 hours a day because she had to change her diet to heal herself. And it just became a giant thing. Instead of getting angry or, you're not doing that. And obviously she was sick, but that transition in me almost being like Mr. Mom. And then when she started feeling better, she could still make phone calls. So she started running a bunch of stuff and then everything shifted what we did. And so inside of that couple of years, it never went back to how it was. So if I had that expectation of getting back to where it was, I'd still be mad. And so now my role's completely different. I'm still in that mode of still like, I cook most of the meals now. I do, there's a lot of stuff I do that's mainly focused on the home. I've never transitioned back to as much in the business as I used to be. It's kind of stayed more on the family side. But I didn't stick to that traditional, well, I'm the man, I should be out and I shouldn't,
Yeah.
So that's I think it's important that as life changes, you evolve with it, like just like we were talking about with our plan.
Totally. The only thing I'd add, Sean, on top of what you're saying, you're talking about like where you want to be as a couple and just don't lose your individuality as part of that. Yeah. And I know that's what you mean too. It's like, well, what is your wife? What talents, what things, what growth does your wife want to have? Still do those things, right? You don't have kids yet, then grow, right? That's how I see it. It's not like, preparation tactically, how do I become a better mom? Maybe she doesn't give a shit about being a mom right now. Maybe she wants to learn about blah, 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 right? Like growth, right? And so what's the individual, what talents do you guys have that you want to develop and continually grow in and partnering, not just in household and work, but then how do you guys partner to support each other in those different areas of growth? And in paraphrasing kind of what you're saying, Sean, is be dynamic and adjust and pivot and work it out. I love the fact that that we can be flexible and ultimately do what makes sense. And I love what you're saying, Sean, is like, how's this? When you do the roles thing, it ends up very much promoting this idea that like, it's not yours together. And it's, you're the breadwinner, it's your money, my house, or, vice versa. Guys, that's not effective, right? Like I have to, when I ran my own consulting firm for 15 years, guess who was the legal counsel on all my statements of work? It was my spouse, because she's really talented in writing and I sound like an idiot. Right. So I'm like, hey, honey, here's this contract. Will you review this contract? Make sure it sounds good. Hey, marketing strategy ideas. What do you think? Like you involve them in what you're doing. And if you want to look at the workplace as an example, we do the same thing, right? You don't hire an employee and then put them in a box and say, hey, you only do these things. If you want an employee that feels fulfilled in the work that you're doing, what you do? What talents do they have? And you let them bring their talents to the table and things evolve and you have them do things maybe that wasn't in the original job description because that's what brings them fulfillment in the work that they're doing, right? It's the same thing with our spouses and with one another. We have to, and we should, in the spirit of finding fulfillment and purpose in life, develop talents, continually grow and use them and bring them to the table. And based upon that, who knows what amazing talents your wife has, right? Like help her develop them. And some of them may not be in the home. Some of them might be elsewhere. And maybe some of your empathetic talents are needs to be brought to bear in the home with kids. So, I don't know, be dynamic, I guess is just the other thing, but I guess what I wanted to say is don't also focus on individual growth as part of that process.
Yeah. Are you in Asia pretty like the stuff that you like to do? Whether it's physical, I know you guys run together. That's what made me think about that. Are most of the things you like to do, you on the same page with, or is she very different in some of the things she likes to do? And she's
very different, right? We only run together because she wants to run.
Okay.
and that's my way of supporting her, right? She doesn't want to run by herself. We end up talking a lot, so I'll run. And so she wanted to do some races. She wanted to do Lodoja, which is a bike race from Logan, Utah to Jackson, Wyoming. I don't ride road bikes. Are you kidding? I did it, right? Because that's her jam. You know what I mean? And jiu-jitsu's mine. And right now she's like obsessed with pickleball. So like we have our different interests, and I should be fostering and supporting her as much as possible in those things, whether they benefit me or not.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I know people who listen a lot and they've heard you say that. They could be thinking, oh, it's easy for Kip to say because him and Asia do everything together anyways, and they're on the same page and blah, blah, blah. And it's very rare that you find couples that are like that. Usually they're very opposite, which it sounds like is the case for you. That's the same.
We are opposite. I'm stable. She's unstable. Like she's trying to convince me to constantly move like somewhere else. The minute she's put for 6 months, she's like, let's move. And I'm like, let's stay, be stable here. Yeah. So we're constantly working together to identify what's best for both of us. Yeah.
That's awesome. Sure. That's important for people to hear.
Yeah. Daryl Hahn, best ways to recruit members for the Iron Council. That's a good question, Daryl.
Be an example, talk about it. Just wearing, it's funny, we have matching hats, Kip and I today. But I can't tell you how many times I'm wearing some sort of Order of Man swag and guys are like, oh man, I love that podcast, or I love that, and you just get into conversation about it. It's a natural occurrence if you're showing up. Kip talked about showing up
in a powerful way.
And how you show up out in the world and you get into these conversations with people and that leads them to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think modeling performance, like be inspiring. If you're getting after it in life, people are going to be like, what's Sean doing? Right? Like, what Kool-Aid is that guy drinking? Because I want some of that Kool-Aid, right? That's one of the most effective ways for us to be a lighthouse. I think the other one is communicating, like share. Like I always felt, I'll give credit to my wife. My default mentality is always take some work, let my results speak for themselves. Right. And I don't need to communicate. I'm just going to kill it. And then I sit back with some expectation that someone on the sideline is going, oh, he's amazing. Right. Sometimes people don't know what you're about unless you're actually sharing it. So sharing powerfully and communicating is a really important aspect of it. And I would be, and I know this is a little bit of a difference, but this came up yesterday at work when I was talking to some employees. It came up at the Maine event. And I talked to this guy that works on Air Force One, and he said, he was talking, I think he mentioned that he had like 8 kids. And I was like, awesome. And I can't remember how we segued into the conversation, but we segued into it about how we tell people we have that many kids and how by default, like, because like I have 6 kids, right? And it's a natural tendency when someone says, oh, Kip, how many kids you got? I downplay, like there's a little bit of like, let me downplay it. Yeah. And not be proud of it because I know the typical result or not result, the typical reaction to me saying 6 kids is, holy crap, you have so many kids and blah, blah,
you're crazy.
And and so I play into that versus me maintaining the frame that my 6 kids, and the opportunity of me having 6 kids is freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't regret one single bit of it. And I am blessed beyond measure, and would be even blessed more if I had 10 or 12 or even 15. Crazy as that is, my kids are the joy of my life. And I should never be downplaying how amazing those lives are because of the quote unquote worldly inconvenience of having them. So what other areas in our life do we kind of downplay the communication? We might even do that on the Iron Council. Well, it's this online, dude group where we, share our feelings, yeah. Oh, what? Yeah, that's weird. It's like, no, dude, I have this network of like-minded, powerful men that are not accepting mediocrity in this world. And they're about shifting, moving, and showing up powerfully for their families, for their communities, in work, and making a difference. I'm part of that group.
Yeah.
Love it, own it, be inspired by it. Don't pander to ignorance and low goals and mediocre people because we're afraid of what they might say.
And there's also baby steps you can take to introducing people, because most likely you tell people about the Iron Council, they're not going to join right away.
Of course.
So I know one of the things I do is I've given out almost 200 of Ryan's books, Sovereignty, so far. So recommend Sovereignty to people. Tell them to read the book. That's a great start. When guys ask me, hey, what are some resources out there for being a better man? Hey, get the book Sovereignty. And if they're struggling financially, I'll send them a book, and I'll just give it to them to help them out. And then I tell everybody to listen to this podcast. That's a good starting point, right? And then that can transition into them joining the IC.
Totally. I've done that at the gym. There's random guys that I got in some talk with, and it segued, and then they're like, oh, that podcast is awesome. I share it with my buddy, and just see if they're in a place for it to resonate, right? And if it's not, they're not, right? They're not ready for it, right?
And who knows where that'll lead? They may recommend it to someone else who joins, and you never know. Yeah.
Charles Phillips II, best way to gain investment in getting local men to get together. I'm going to start setting up meetups in Colorado and welcome any advice. So best way to gain investment. Oh, I'm assuming what he means gain investment is get numbers, right? Get people coming together locally.
Yeah. I mean, the best is to plan it, put it together, find a space, book a time, and then put it on the Mighty Networks. Announce it, but you have an agenda. I know when I did the first one that I did, I reached out to you, Kip, because I heard you had done one.
That's right.
And asked what you did agenda wise, what you talked about, so if you want some help structurally in what you're going to do, that one, we happen to have Ryan, zoomed into, for that one, just to say hello to the guys that showed up. And, so just, I think plan it well, have an agenda, know what you're going to talk about, book the time, and put it on Mighty Networks.
Yeah. And that might have baby steps too, right? Maybe it's 10 guys the first one, maybe it's 20, then it's 30 or whatever.
Maybe it's 3.
Yeah, maybe it's 3, but they're still highly valuable, right?
Yeah.
And so, just momentum, get some momentum behind it. And it's possible. Charles, I don't know where you're at, but like the last 3 meetups that we did here in Utah, I think we had like 60, 70 guys. Like the conference room was like too full. It was too full. And it was so giant. Powerful. It was so valuable.
Don't expect that though. That's that's rare.
Take some, work it. Work it and be consistent. All right. Chris Gatchko, he says, just share your thoughts on both Legacy and Maine Event. Well, that's not fair to you. So sorry.
No, I can tell you the last Legacy, because I took my boys to the last one. They still talk about it. It was so good for us, and we're already good at those things. The stuff we were doing there, being on the same page, we still came up with more together. We came up with like the Villalobos men of the family. We have our own little code of honor that we put together while we were there. And that's still giving value to the relationship with my boys that I have from being at that event. So I can't tell you how valuable it was. And this one, honestly, like Maine Event, the only reason I'm not there is because I'm with my family. And that was last minute. Since we put this together, I had a ticket, I was going. But then we put this, and, I'm always going to choose my family over every other thing first. So that's the only reason I didn't go. And I was bummed I wasn't there, to be quite honest. There would have been growth for me. And, I missed the opportunity to be able to build a relationship with more men that are trying to be better as well. And so there's more value than you're ever going to pay in time and effort to get there. That's just my 2 cents, in the experience that I've had. So, but I'd love to hear what you got. Were you at both of them this time?
Yeah. I was at both. I think you shared enough on Legacy. I'll just talk about Maine Event. That was last weekend. We had 105 guys out to Ryan's property, 3 days of intentionality, right? And being fully present around the conversation of protect, provide, and preside, which is kind of our motto within the Iron Council. And so I think out of the 105 men, like the majority of them were Iron Council men. And there's just a handful of guys that weren't part of the IC. So, and not the personal guys, but like that means the conversations were like great to just even better, right? Because these were guys that were actively or have been actively participating in their growth and investing and becoming better men, not just, hey, I'll go out to this retreat and kind of see what I think. The other thing about that is we had a leadership meeting the day before, which was comprised of all the battle team leaders and upper leadership of the Iron Council. We had like 30 something battle team leaders and mentors in that event. So we had just a lot of awesome guys there. So the conversations were really great. Here's my takeaways. And there's so much takeaways, but let's be frank. What we take away is what we got out of it. And what I got is going to be different than what you would have gotten, Sean, based upon what's a priority in your life, what you're focused on, and kind of, so no one take this and go, that's all they covered. This is where my mindset was during the entire event that were kind of my big major takeaways that were profound for me. So the first one is probably the distinction and the understanding of what does it really mean to band together with other men. And I can't help but think that, and I'm not, my Insta's not that impressive. Like, I think, Sean, you're like probably blowing me out of the water from a follower's perspective. But if I pull up my Instagram, the reality of it is those few thousands of people following me, they don't give a shit about me. The minute that I don't show up powerfully, the minute they can criticize me, the minute they think, well, Kip's out of integrity, is the minute not only will they stop following me, but they will more likely stab me in the back. That's reality. Like, I have some dude like trolls me on YouTube and stuff, and will like constantly make comments. Yeah, no joke. Like, constantly make comments about how Kip's constantly out of integrity because, this and that, or whatever. Like he's really adamant. I don't know him. He doesn't really know me.
Of course not.
But my point being is there's a big difference between this superficial, like, oh, I love Ryan. Ryan's awesome. And Kip's this or Sean's this. And the minute we don't show up perfect in that ivory tower and we make mistakes because we're human, despite the fact that we're constantly on this podcast saying, hey guys, this is more beneficial to us than you. We're constantly fighting to stay in integrity. We're on the path of trying to become better men, but we're not the man, right? We're on this with you. Despite all that, people will backstab you in a second, right? If it serves their purpose. And so me getting really present to that versus what does it really mean for Sean to have my back? And am I going to kick Sean out of the boat the minute he has a hard time not rowing? Or I'm going to stand for him despite his circumstances, despite his struggles, despite those things. And so really, what does it mean to be part of a brotherhood? What does it really mean to actually care for someone? That's number one. Another thing that really crossed my mind, and there's only two more I can think of. The other thing that crossed my mind is just the power of principles. And I had a conversation with a handful of guys at one of the tables, and it was great because I've made this connection over the years, right? And he goes, he said something to the extent like, Kip, I can't help but like take everything that we're talking about today, and it shows up all over in the Bible, right? And I'm like, of course it does.
Yeah.
Right. Like principles are principles. Right. And so we're just nerding out about how many of these principles transcend. Right. And one thing that like really that has been more present on my mind. And so as an example, let me share an example. I didn't talk about it there, but it's an example of this is look at the principle of extreme ownership. Right. And Jocko actually has these like 5 steps of taking ownership, realize that there's a problem, identify your role in it, communicate the impact, recommitment of, what you're going to do to change it and whatever, right? Look at that. And then look at the process of repentance for you guys that are Christian. What's the repentance process? It's owning it, right? There's a mistake. I own it. I correct the behavior and I recommit. Right? That's how we repent of something. That same exact process is actually how people learn.
Yeah.
Right? After action review, I make a mistake of something. Okay. I take ownership of it. Okay, what could I have done better? Okay. I see the impact of the decision I made. I course correct. I recommit to do it. Like that's how we learn. So here we are, like this principle of, it's Jocko's extreme ownership, the Christian version of the repentance process. And then if you get into learning organizations, it's the same process for all 3 things. Like this is how important these conversations are. They're not order of man conversations. They're principles and conversations that we're having. And then the last thing that really crossed my mind, and Sean, feel free to if you want to nerd it out on any of these things. But the last thing that really came to mind, how easy it was. And this is maybe a little bit as what's us working through it. How's that? Guys working through it. But we got some great presentations about different areas about showing up powerfully as men. And guys constantly get wrapped up on right and wrong. What's the right way, right? What's the right way to do a vision? What's the right job for me to have fulfillment in my life? What's the wrong job? And it just reminded me, like, man, how we need to think more critically. And it's not as clean as right and wrong. In fact, it's probably not right and wrong. It's probably just, is it serving you in this moment right now in this season? And if it is, awesome. And then you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And that's not going to happen until you take action. And then we evolve, and it's continuous improvement, and it's change. And so much of the conversations we have a tendency to like try to bucket it and say, is this the right way? And the answer is not, is it the right way? Just, are you showing up powerfully with what you have? Are you taking advantage of what you have? And if the answer is yes, then more opportunities will present themselves. Don't worry about like, oh, is it the right job? It's like, no, are you acting right for the job? Are you taking advantage of the moment? And I don't know. And that was just a big thing for me coming out of the week, is just the power of that, and kind of back to the whole banding and really having empathy for people, like really like connecting, because our legacy lives where, and I'm sure you guys talked about at the Legacy event, your legacy lives in people, in relationships, not in a bank account, not in property somewhere. It literally, your impact in this world when you're dead and gone is what the imprint that you left on people, connection. That's it.
That's funny you say that, because I actually gave a talk. Ryan had me give a talk on your legacy and what that means. And that's exactly what I said is, what you leave behind and how you made people feel, what you left in the world and your example and how you showed up. And, as you say that, I think the most powerful thing from any group like that is, you mentioned that troll, right? Or people, and not even that troll, just people in general, they tend to try and look for people's weaknesses or where they're wrong or where they're not showing up or where they mess up and are critical of those things, instead of what I appreciate and what I appreciated with Legacy or anything that has to do with being in a group of people that want to be better. I appreciate their shortcomings. I appreciate not just that their shortcomings or that they have them, but when they own them, like you said, and they say when they repent. And I actually get so proud of them in those moments, because that's so hard to, number one, to be able to acknowledge it, to be able to own it, and then do something about it. That's so much harder than trying to hide from it. And that's courage. And so when somebody's showing up as a courageous man that wants to be better, and you can be in a group of 100 guys that are in that pursuit. And one thing I'll say at those events, no matter what, you're going to find that the majority of men are struggling with something, and that they find a space where they're willing to talk about it, and they can gain that support where they're not going to be judged, where they're not going to be criticized, and they can be helped to be better. And I mean, and when you can see that in other guys and you can find that courage and it's so inspiring. We're talking about inspiration earlier. You just get so inspired by seeing that willingness to overcome and help and support each other in those endeavors. For me, that's the most powerful part of both of those events.
And just to add to that, because this was another thing that was really present for me, and it's kind of related to what we're saying, is there's two frames in that example. There's one frame. Let me say it this way. There's one frame that I can have, and I can go, Order of Man's this org that serves me, and I can be part of it. And I could be inspired by Ryan. I'm saying this cheesy, like, because it's even embarrassing to kind of say, but I could be inspired by Ryan, and I could be inspired by Kip, right? And I might put them on the pedestal, right? A little bit unwilling, unasked for, because I don't ask for that. Who's that about?
Yeah, it's about yourself.
It's about you.
Yeah.
You know what's a really powerful way of joining the Iron Council, of being part of Order Man? Freaking show up to serve. So instead of actually like putting me on a pedestal and criticize me if I make fault, maybe when I make a fault, you reach out and say, brother, how can I help you? Maybe look at the other people in your life that are struggling, and instead of criticizing them and going, oh, well, this guy's, overweight or whatever, why don't you do something about it and actually have the frame that I show up powerfully in this world regardless, and I serve people, and I lift them up, and I build a legacy, and I have empathy, versus let me just consume from these ivory towers, and when those ivory towers aren't so ivory, let me just bitch and complain about it.
Yeah,
those are two different ways of showing up in the world, drastically different.
I mentioned that most people do that, and that it's easier. And it's easier to blame. And I think that's what most people are looking for. They're looking for someone else to blame, so that it gives them a reason to not have to show up and to work harder and to try harder and to be different.
And we all have great talents to provide one another. So why aren't we serving each other and actually having some love and empathy for one another? I mean, what a wonderful, powerful way. Imagine that when people made mistakes, that we all banded together and see how we could help them instead of beating them down. I don't know. Maybe I'm prepping you guys. So for when I make mistakes, I'm just asking for some love, Sean. Come on. Just have some empathy and love for me, please. I'm whole and complete, and gosh darn it, people love me. All right. Ian Roth. It is important for leadership to have an open and timely dialogue with team members, what's an effective way to do this when your team is 100+ members? Okay. And really quick, Sean, I'm assuming we're almost up on time. So do you want to wrap up with this one? Okay.
Yeah, this is the last one for sure.
Sorry if I'm keeping you.
No, effective with 100+. I think it's first knowing what you're trying to achieve as an organization. That I'm assuming this is talking about business. Maybe it's other thing. I mean, it could be in church.
100+, you immediately jump to company, right? But company, church, maybe, or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So in any organization, it's important first to know where you're headed, what you're trying to achieve as an organization. And then
like the why and the mission and purpose is clear.
Yes.
Is what I'm hearing.
And then be consistent in that message, being strong in your values, whatever the values are for that, being consistent in that. But then you also have to, as far as communication goes, you have to have a system in place that allows you to reach down. You can't, I think too many places rely on just their upper management to talk to find out what's going on in the company. And that's a big mistake. You need to have systems in place that put you in a position where you're around everybody, where you can, now in 100 or a couple hundred, maybe that's manageable. Once you get into the thousands, like my agency covers thousands of people across the country. It gets harder to manage, but you can still have systems in place. Like I put together things to help me find my better up and comers. Like we have a thing we're doing at our home in next week. We made people qualify for it in our organization. They had to show up and do certain things, and we'll have 100 to 200 people at our home. We're putting a big event on and we're doing this. If it wasn't at our home, we'd rent a place and we'd have that. But I'm going to spend those 2.5 days of being in their world, getting to know them, finding out who they are, what they're trying to achieve, what they're experiencing, how it's going, how they're feeling. And that's where I'm going to find out really what's happening in our organization, so I can have my thumb on the pulse of that. And so that's not an innate part of our business or our quote unquote system for how we run our business. And we don't have to do that, but we have implemented those events, those things to help us as a system in our business to be able to reach down, because I can't get on the phone and just be calling those people all the time. And I don't know who to call, who's going to be the most effective use of my time. It's the ones that are doing it. And so you need to have a system in place to find those people. And then when I'm in those interactions, if I know what I stand for, what my values are, what we're trying to achieve, and how I show up in those moments with them is going to be how I transfer that to them. That's my best chance of it.
Really? Well, and I think what you just said, you got to model it, right? Culture is critical, right? So you got to, what does it mean to work here? How do we do work here, right? And what is the cultural, not just the mission, the values, but kind of the expected mindsets of how your organization operates, right? And then I think the other part is just like your ability to move to the right. 100 people, you're not impacting 100 people. I mean, you need middle management, right? You need the right leaders that are aligned with that culture, with those values, showing up in a really powerful way. You don't want all your employees working there because of you. Because now what if you move to the right too much and you're only in the office a few hours a week because you have this flexibility of something great that you've created? Like, you need to know that your middle managers or your next level of management is showing up really powerfully and really driving the conversation forward and showing up, and they're modeling performance, right? And so kind of back to what you said, Sean, you had some prerequisites of these individuals. What is required to be a leader in our organization, and how are they showing up powerfully? 60% of people will stay in an unsatisfying job when they report to a manager that they feel inspires them. We will do work we don't enjoy when we have a good boss. Now, on the flip side, it's a complete opposite. You can have an amazing job, and if you report to a manager that is or a leader that is pathetic, it doesn't matter. Right. So that middle management is critical. The only other things that came to mind, like statistically, is You could do skip level one-on-ones. I do think that's valuable. It gives a sense of like importance. My reports will meet with the COO every so often and just kind of skip level one-on-ones, but you got to be careful, right? To honor the chain of command. We want to make sure that CEO doesn't undermine me, right, as their team lead. But it's good to have that open dialogue and transparency in skip levels. The other thing is like the value of town halls, right? It's like, hey, throw it out. What questions do you guys have for upper management or for the executive team? Have that dialogue. And then the other thing that we do on a quarterly basis, and we're actually getting ready to do our executive retreat offsite. One of our requirements before we do our executive offsite is that we've met with our divisions and practices, and we've defined that team's critical issues. And then we're now their representative, and we're going to bring that to the table at the executive level. Now, we could do that and that'd be great, but they need to know we did that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really important come January that we go, hey, we heard you. Everyone, we discussed, here's the list of the things that you guys said we needed to focus on as an organization. So they know it's actively being acted upon, right? We can ask feedback, but if we don't give them the feedback that, hey, I got it, and this is now what I'm going to do then they don't think their voice is being heard, right? And so you need to make sure that you're rolling that back into communication. So then that way they know that those communications happening maybe a little bit lower down the organizational chain is making its way to the top. And then that way they know that it's not just smoke and mirrors and that their voice is being heard.
That's good. I just had one more thought on that, is that your upper managers, if you want to call them that, or whatever the leaders are in your organization, you need to be speaking with them at least weekly. At least there needs to be constant communication with them and all of your top leaders. And then these other things are built to find future leaders and up and comers, and to hear that voice, like what you're talking about. When I said have your thumb on the pulse, that's exactly what I was talking about, is what you just said. But I think that constant communication, that's what I call it, CCC, consistent communication with all of your frontline leaders you need to have, and then building things to be able to reach down. And you saw that we were just talking about the main event, right? You guys did that exact thing with having the leadership come in the day before, having that conversation before the rest of the group came in. That should always be built into everything that you do, where you have those layers.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Guys, great questions. That was fun. Hopefully you didn't rant too long on some of those. Join us if you haven't already, right? So if you're listening to the podcast, but you haven't joined our communities, whether it's the Facebook group or looked into the Iron Council, please do so. I provided those URLs already before. Maybe a couple call to actions. One is the Masculinity Manifesto, Ryan's new book. You can order that online wherever books are sold. So know about that, subscribe, follow us, whether it's on YouTube or the podcast. But most importantly, just show up powerfully. Let's all band together. Let's show up. Let's support each other. And we're coming to the new year. Don't start January 1. Just start now. There is no such thing as tomorrow. I like that play of words, right? Tomorrow is a word that represents something that doesn't exist. You got now. That's it. So whatever you're doing right now, show up powerfully in regards to what that is, and just constantly show up powerfully throughout your day, and be that inspiration to other individuals. Any closing remarks, Sean, before we wrap this up?
No, love it. Appreciate you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, for sure. Until Friday on our Friday Field Notes, take action and become the men you were meant to be.